Hello, I'm ANEKA from Made to Sew, and welcome to part 4 of our pattern matching tutorials. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to be sharing tips for inserting an invisible zipper and achieving a pattern match through the invisible zipper. So, if you're working with a patterned fabric and you want to have an invisible zipper in one of the seams, but you want the patterned fabric to continue through the invisible zipper, this tutorial is for you. You can also use this tutorial if perhaps rather than a patterned fabric, you have got some horizontal seams that need to continue through the invisible zipper, such as a waist seam. Then the same rules that I teach you here will apply. So collect up your supplies, get your invisible zipper and your garment ready, and we can begin. Now you're going to want to begin by inserting the first side of your invisible zipper. It doesn't matter which side you put in first. Now, generally for inserting the first side, you don't need to think about too much. There are cases when you might have a very complicated garment or very complicated pattern, but most of the time you're just going to be putting that zip in and remembering where you wanted the zip to be in the first place. So if you go back to tutorial 2, you will remember that we wanted our centre back seam to be in the centre of our check or plaid. So I've inserted the first side and I'm happy with it. Now I'm going to show you how to create the match. If you are new to inserting invisible zipper, please watch my invisible zipper tutorial. It's very detailed and it will cover how to insert the zip step by step. I won't be covering that in this tutorial because I don't want it to be super long. I'm just going to be covering how to match the pattern across the invisible zipper. Now I recommend you take a chalk pen or a piece of chalk, and what we're going to do now is we're going to mark onto the zipper tape where the check is or where the pattern is that you want to copy. So for mine, I'm going to be going and marking the light grey lines, and I need to do this accurately. You may want to use a ruler as well. Now this same process is what I would do if I had a seam in a garment. So if I wasn't matching a plaid or a check, but I was matching a seam across an invisible zipper, you can do this same technique. You would mark it with your chalk. Now I'm going to work my way all the way from the top to the bottom of the zip doing this, and I'm just marking, making sure it's nice and straight, and you must make sure the zip is fastened when you do this. Also, you may need to give your side that you've already sewn a little bit of a pull so that it is nice and flat and you haven't got a crease down here. Okay, so hopefully you can see that I have marked the zipper tape with the markings of my plaid or check. Now I'm going to use those as a guide for positioning the zip onto the other side. So I'm going to open my zipper and using the markings on the zipper tape as a guide, I'm going to turn it over right sides together and I'm going to aim to match those up. Obviously, I also need to make sure that I'm putting my zip in the correct position for my seam allowances. So in this case, the teeth of my zip need to be 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimetres away from the raw edge of my fabric. And I'm just going to keep peeling that back and checking, starting at the top and working your way down. And once you're happy with it, you can start to insert some pins to hold it in place. I would recommend that you don't put your pins too close to the teeth of the zip because in a second we are actually going to do the zip up to check, or as a first check, to see if we're happy with the pattern that we have matched so far. So I'm just working my way down doing this. And if you've watched my zipper tutorial, you'll know that I might suggest you draw a line for you to position your zipper teeth on, or obviously check with the ruler that your teeth are 5/8, 1.5 centimetres, or whatever your seam allowance is in from the edge. So once you've pinned all the way down the zip, you're then going to want to try and do the zip up. This is why, as I said, you don't want to pin too close to the teeth. Now, I will show you this from further away in a second, but I also wanted to show you nice and close. So I fastened the zip, and now you can see whether your stripe or check is in the same position as those chalk bits. Mine is starting to rub off, but I can just about see them. And B, you're going to need to sort of fold the fabric over a little bit, but you want to be rolling it over so that it will be finishing right on the edge to see if you're happy with how it will look when it's sewn. And this is looking pretty good. Obviously, if you're unhappy with it, then you would simply redo it. And just so you can see the whole of the picture from further away, you are just going to want to roll these across and check that you're happy that your check, plaid, pattern, whatever it is you're working with, matches up, that you're happy with where the zip is placed, and tweak that if you're not. Now, once you're happy with this, the next step is to baste or tack the zip in place. I would always recommend that for the second side because it's again one of those times, and it depends on the fabric you're working with. You might sew this and it might be spot on. You might not, and then you're going to have to do some unpicking. So I always try and err on the side of caution, and so we're going to baste and tack the second side of the zip in place. So I've got my needle and thread here. I'm working with the cotton basting thread that you will have seen me use on the third part of the tutorials when I was actually sewing the matched seams together. Now you're going to need to open the zip to do this. And obviously you're going to need to sew this in a flat layer. And we're going to do the same technique that I did in the third tutorial. Small stitches, 1/4 inch, 5mm in length, nice and tight. And this time we're going to do this much closer to the teeth. You need to stitch this where you plan to sew. If you've inserted an invisible zipper before, you will know that you must sew right close up to the teeth to make it invisible. So that's what you need to do with your basting and tacking as well. And actually, if I hold my zip like that, you can't see that I have actually already basted and tacked this area until I push the teeth away. So as you're basting and tacking this, you really need to hold the zip in place firmly and push those teeth away so that you can get really close to it. Take your time doing it, you don't need to rush, because if you do this step right, then you won't have any problems moving forward. And you'll find when you sew this on the machine that it's perfect. Again, nice snug stitches to hold everything in position. And I'm just pushing those teeth away so that I can get really close to them. Now, if I am making something with perhaps a seam, it's got a waist seam, and the invisible zipper is going in the centre back of the garment, and it will go across the waist seam, then I might not necessarily need to baste or tack the entire length of the zip. In those cases, I might actually head to the sewing machine and use a basting or tacking stitch. So that's a large straight stitch on your sewing machine, about 4mm in length or larger, and just complete that over the area that you want to match. So a little bit either side of it. And then, just like we're going to do in a second, you'll fasten your zip and check you're happy with it before running it through the machine on your usual stitch length, so the much smaller 2.5mm that you'll use for your everyday sewing. Now, once you've basted or tacked your zip in position, either by hand or on the sewing machine, you're going to want to fasten the zipper so that you can take one last look. You want to be really picky here. You want to check all your horizontal stripes or checks if you have them, and vertically you want to be looking to check the width. You can get your ruler out, you can measure them. And actually, if you look closely at mine here, you will see I've got a little bit of a bigger sized square here. So in that case, I'm going to undo this little section and redo it until I'm 100% happy with it. It's best to take your time and put your patience in here, because if you get it right here, I promise once it goes through the sewing machine, it will still be correct. If you watched my tutorial on how to match standard seams, you will see that I used clover fork pins. Unfortunately, we can't use these on the zip because the zip would simply get in the way, and we definitely wouldn't be able to sew using an invisible zipper foot. However, the other technique I spoke about was wander tape and double-sided basting tape in that tutorial, and both of these methods you can use on your zip if you need to. Again, just like I explained in that tutorial, they are a last resort for me. I will try this method first, but if you're working with a really terrible fabric, so it probably is really stretchy and it moves all over the place, and even when you've basted and tacked your zip in place really tightly, it still moves because of the stretch or perhaps the looseness of the weave, then I will pick up my wander tape. You're going to apply it just like I show in that tutorial. So it's double-sided tape. You need to position one side on the zip, one side on the fabric. Again, you're going to need to fasten the zip up afterwards. You need to put the tape close to where you're going to be stitching, but not so that you can see it on the right side of the garment. But that would be my go-to if all else fails. Right, once you're happy with your zip, join me at the sewing machine and I will show you how to sew the second side. However, if you're happy with zips, it's just like sewing a standard invisible zipper. Now I'm using my invisible zipper foot here. Again, if you'd watched my previous tutorial on joining seams, you will know that I normally recommend using a walking foot or the dual feed foot if you have one on your sewing machine. However, my dual feed foot does not work with my invisible zipper foot, so I need to put the invisible zipper foot on and hope for the best. Obviously, if I have tacked and basted this well enough, it should hold in this fabric. If you're working with a very tricky fabric, again, you could go to a zipper foot, and with my machine, with my zipper foot, I can use the dual feed. But again, obviously that only works if you have a dual feed setting on your sewing machine. Just something to consider. Otherwise, take it slowly, hold everything in place, and sew all the way to the end. And there you have it, a perfectly matched invisible zipper all the way down. Obviously, you'll need to remove your basting and tacking threads and then sew up the bottom of the invisible zipper just like you would if you were completing a standard seam. So following the matching that I talked about in my standard seam pattern matching tutorial. I'm going to leave you to go ahead and do that, attach the facing, whatever else you need to do to finish your garment. I really hope you enjoyed the tutorial and that you feel more confident when it comes to working with patterned fabric in the future. I hope you enjoyed the whole series of our pattern matching tutorials. Thank you for watching and see you soon.